Good evening and welcome back to 31 Horror Nights. It's October 23rd and tonight's movie is Beau is Afraid. I was anxiously awaiting the day that I would watch this movie because Beau is Afraid is 3 hours long. It is not only the longest movie of this Horror Nights, it is the longest movie of any Horror Nights. And for the record, Ari Aster is one of the few people who could make a movie this long and I'd still want to see it. Hereditary is still the scariest movie I've ever seen, and while I didn't love Midsommar as much as a lot of other people do, it was still a deeply unsettling movie. This movie stars Joaquin Phoenix. He's always been a good actor. I mean, even his forehead can act. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, look it up. It's hilarious. But ever since Joker, Joaquin Phoenix has sort of gotten a special level of notoriety. From what I can tell, this movie is just an older man with severe paranoia and anxiety trying to get to his mother's house, and that is apparently quite a journey. I've heard a lot of genres be associated with this movie, but I think it's supposed to be like a black comedy horror movie. I honestly don't know what to expect, but knowing Ari Aster, it's probably going to be very dark. But I should probably just get started watching it now, or else it won't be done till the day is over. Oh boy. I hate to say it, but Beau is Afraid is the first Ari Aster movie I didn't like. It has its moments, it does, but overall I was unsatisfied with it. I'm giving it a 5 out of 10. It was never as engaging as Hereditary or Midsommar, but it was engaging enough for it to have me and then completely lose me at the very end. Ari Aster has techniques and filmmaking strategies to make the audience as uncomfortable as possible. In his horror movies, that then becomes making the audience afraid. In this movie, it just keeps getting more uncomfortable. Another movie that did everything it could to make the audience uncomfortable the entire time was The Killing of a Sacred Deer, which I despise. But at least this movie can be kind of funny and there is some context. I'm pretty sure that the first 2/3 of this movie is sort of like a film representation of what it's like to have severe anxiety, the type that just leaves you paranoid. Every single time, the absolute worst case scenario happens. And that's where the dark humor comes into it, because it can get ridiculous at points. There was a part in the movie where Beau had to get something from a dollar store across the street, and he didn't have the keys to his apartment. So he had to leave the door open and prop the door open, run out and come back. But as he's paying, his credit card declines and he's fumbling in his wallet for change, and he turns around and he sees hundreds of people just swarming in through the door and walking into his apartment specifically. And then when he finally leaves, he sees that the streets are completely deserted. This entire city went into his apartment. Stuff like that clued me in pretty quickly that most of what I'm seeing in this movie isn't strictly real. It's mostly a representation of the anxiety where you're constantly fearing the worst case scenario. However, since you don't know what's real and what isn't, it's kind of hard to tell what of the plot is even real. And I was kind of settling on the idea that most of what I'm seeing was real, it's just embellished a lot by Beau's anxiety. But that completely fell apart at the end, and I'll have to talk about that more in the spoiler section. Anyway, the fact that this movie starred Joaquin Phoenix was clearly a selling point. Joaquin Phoenix is a big-ticket actor. He definitely does well in his performance. He's very good with non-verbal acting, and that's good because most of his acting was non-verbal acting. A majority of Beau's dialogue consists of the words what and okay. Beau is the kind of person to get overwhelmed very easily. And that sort of passivity is a very prominent character feature for Beau throughout this entire movie. Still, I would not put Joaquin Phoenix as the best performance in this movie. There were two that I thought were way better, actually. The first is Kylie Rogers as Tony. She wasn't even in the movie for very long, but when she was in, she made an impact. If we had to link her character to anything in Beau's psyche, it would be that she is the personification of everything that terrified and continues to terrify Beau about teenage girls. But even her performance pales in comparison to Patti LuPone as Beau's mother, Mona. Seriously, give this woman an Oscar. This is like Toni Collette in Hereditary level good. As for what genre this movie falls into, I think I would call it a surrealist horror movie in the category of something like Eraserhead. Yes, there are moments of very, very dark comedy, but it's the type of comedy so dark you feel bad for laughing. And it has its moments of being every bit as disturbing as Hereditary or Midsummer. But when you look at the whole thing, I just didn't think it works, especially when you consider how long the movie was. The pacing was such that I felt it was taking its time at every single step, but once it got to the very end, it just rushed it. I spent like 2 hours and 45 minutes thinking, oh my gosh, how much longer is this movie, to how are there only 10 minutes left? You go from vague notions and strange inklings and lots of questions to plot and sensory overload, and then the movie just stops. Beau's Afraid really feels like a passion project. It kind of just feels like Ari Aster making the movie he wants to make. And it's mostly just for him. And you know what? It's well within his rights to do that. And obviously other people can find things in this movie that I didn't. But considering how special Midsummer and Hereditary were, I found this movie a little disappointing. And to really tell you why, I'm going to have to go into spoilers, which will start now. I told you that this movie had me and then it lost me, and I can tell you the exact pinpoint moment this movie lost me. This movie lost me when I saw that Beau's father was really this gigantic phallic symbol penis monster that the mom had locked up in the attic. It might sound like I'm leaving out context, but it really is sprung on you that fast in the movie as well. But I feel like I can give you a little bit more context to the ending up until that point. Throughout this movie, Beau's goal is to make it to his mother's funeral because she just died in a very cartoony way by having a chandelier fall on her head and basically, destroy her head and face. A majority of this movie is him just trying to get back to his old home. But finally, after events including but not limited to getting hit by a truck, being stabbed by a naked guy while he also was naked, being held hostage by these weird Annie Wilkes people, being hunted down by a crazy war veteran, watching a teenage girl commit suicide by drinking house paint right in front of him, and then the mom coming in and blaming him for it. Having sex for the first time, even though his mom told him that if he had an orgasm, he would have a heart attack and die. But when he does have an orgasm, he lives. However, suddenly, the woman he's having sex with turns stiff, drops dead, and falls over. After all that, it's revealed that the mother isn't even dead. She faked her own death. And why? This is when we get hit by the classic Ari Aster WTF moment. Usually this is like halfway through the movie, like Charlie getting her head ripped off or those old people jumping off that cliff and breaking their faces open. But here it's almost at the end, and the twist is that the mother, who had been painted in a very reverent light throughout the entire movie, is actually a horrendously abusive monster. She is the one who gave him so much anxiety and so much fear of the world. She was in cahoots with Beau's therapist, recorded all of their sessions, and took every single thing that he said about her as a personal attack. And every single flaw, every single misstep Beau had ever made in his entire life. Even stuff he did just because he was a kid, or because he was pressured into it, or because he was scared. She remembers all of that, and that was just building up as resentment throughout his entire life. And she faked her own death and put Beau through all this hell just because on the day where he was supposed to fly over and visit her, his keys were stolen, and he called her about it, saying he didn't feel comfortable leaving his apartment wide open, and she assumed that was all a lie just to spite her. Mona Wasserman is a freaking supervillain, and it's possible that she had a hand in everything that Beau went through on the way home. She has this bizarre psychopathic view of the world when it comes to being a mother, like, as long as she loves the kid will be perfect and never hurt her and never mess up. So at this point, the movie still had me. In fact, I was starting to get excited. Things were picking up. But then he asked to know the truth about his father, because she had been telling him for years that he died when they had sex on their wedding night because he had like a heart murmur and an orgasm triggered a heart attack, and it was the same for his father and his grandfather. So basically up until that point, Beau is like 50 years old and has never even had an orgasm because he thinks he's going to die. And there's like a recurring memory in this movie about where Beau is like arguing with his mom, and then the mom like locks him up in the attic. And then she brings him up to the attic, and that's the point where we see like this emaciated, like imprisoned man in there, and I thought that that was the father, but no. Then you turn over, like the camera pans over, and then you see this giant penis monster. And then they lost me. They just lost me there. There's a point right after that where Beau completely snaps and tries to kill his mom by strangling her, but he snaps himself out of it, and then for some reason he gets on like this boat. And then the boat ends up in the middle of like this coliseum, but it's also like a trial where the mother's lawyer, who we had heard from at another point in the movie, was basically like charging him with every single mistake he has ever made. Now all of that was not a personal affront to his mom. The motor on his boat dies. It seems everyone in the room is turning on him. He has nowhere to stand. And at that point, he basically just gives up. The boat like instantly flips over. It's like supernaturally quick. And then it just sits there looking at this boat capsized. And then the credits start. And the credits keep going, still holding on that shot. And I skip forward because I was thinking there was like a post-credit scene. And then I saw throughout the entire credit sequence, people in the crowd are getting up and leaving. And the entire arena is empty by the end of it. And then the movie just ends. So my first thought when finishing this movie was, what the hell did I just watch? Well, after reading some articles and reviews of this movie, I think that that's not the right question to be asking. I think the better question is, how did I interpret what the hell I just watched? And here's my abridged interpretation of this movie's ending. I think up until the reveal of how horrible his mother was, most of what we saw is an embellishment of what did in fact happen. But once he realizes that his mother has done nothing but ruin his life for 50 years, his mind breaks. And that, in combination with both his insane anxiety, it might even be like paranoid schizophrenia or something like that, causing like hallucinations, and the fact that he'd been off his meds for a while causes him to completely lose his grip on reality. I think he did try to strangle his mother. But then the scene in the Coliseum, I think that was him actually getting on that boat and like going out on that lake. And that's him falling further and further into darkness, realizing that he will never get out of the control of his abusive mother. He sees his mother as like this god at this point. Despite all of his privileges, he now has absolutely nobody left who cares about him. And the learned helplessness that his mother had instilled in him is so powerful, he knows he's not strong enough to make things better. So I think that boat capsizing is emblematic of him giving up and jumping into the lake. But hey, that's just my interpretation, which is literally worth no more or less than anybody else's. I was on the fence through most of this movie, because there were some really good things in it, but overall it wasn't impacting me the way that Hereditary or Midsommar did, but that ending kind of ruined things for me. And again, it was the moment when I saw the giant penis monster that I thought, this isn't scary anymore, this is just weird. And considering the fact that this ending had been built up to for 3 hours, it was a letdown for me. That was the point where I think that the movie just got a little too lost in the sauce. Hereditary and Midsommar had powerful endings. This ending just left me unsatisfied and confused. There are a lot of things I can appreciate in this movie. That, hero's journey dream sequence that happened when Beau was watching a play, that was beautifully done. There were some really good performances. There were some incredible sets in this movie. And of course, it has that Ari Aster direction and cinematography. But the ending just felt rushed and incomplete, which is especially sad considering how much time the movie took to get there. This movie can certainly be for some people. Like, I can imagine other people loving this, but it just wasn't for me. I don't think that Beau is Afraid does anything that Midsommar or Hereditary did not do much better. I still have mad respect for Ari Aster as a director. I still am interested to see what he's going to make in the future, but Beau is Afraid was a miss for me. Alright, thank you for listening. I'll see you tomorrow.